come back refreshed. Let me ask you a question this morning. Do you ever wake up in a bad mood? Is the better question, do you ever wake up in a good mood? We know we do. Sometimes we go to bed in a bad mood and we get up in a rottener mood. Is that a good word, rottener? I don't know. Okay. Yeah. Ever find yourself a little bad-tempered, cantankerous, maybe a little crabby, disgruntled, irritable, even testy? Quit elbowing each other out there in the audience. We all do. Back in the day when I still made my living as a high school band director, my students would probably tell you that every one of those words I just used fit me to a T about a week before a marching contest. Family and friends sometimes. I can remember one time my mother-in-law came to visit, and she was around the house during the week of marching contest. She told Darlene, she said, "I'm never coming down here again before marching contest." I took some of that far too seriously in those days. Any of those words that you can come up with probably apply to you at one time or another. And an umbrella word that we can maybe use on top of all of that is the word grumpy. It's fair to say, I think, that all of us get a little grumpy every once in a while. Can I at least have a gentle amen to that? That was more than a gentle amen. The truth is, we are human beings, and being grumpy just happens sometimes. But here's the thing. We don't want grumpy to become our default attitude. We don't want grumpy to be the way in which other people see us. We don't want grumpy to be the relationship we have with God. It's always good to remember that an attitude is contagious. Is contagious. One evening when Darlene and I were still living in the Parsons in Cuero, I was serving the First Methodist Church of Cuero at that time. I was going about my business one evening. I don't know what I was doing, but I was in the house and I heard Darlene screaming for help in the backyard. I opened the back door, threw it open, just ran over there, and instantly I knew what the problem was because the smell of skunk filled the air. Filled the air. Our beloved dog Bridget had had a close encounter with a skunk, and the skunk had won. Anyone here this morning ever been sprayed by a skunk? Right there. Right there. Any of you ever had to clean up a pet that's been sprayed by a skunk? Oh, you know what it's like. You know what it's like. Even if you haven't been the one that's played with a skunk, it's still pretty tough being around the person that has. And that's what it's like sometimes when we hang out with friends, our family members, that are just grumpy all the time. Their grump makes the air unpleasant. Grumpy people make the world disagreeable for others. I don't know what makes you grumpy. I have my own list. I get grumpy sometimes when I don't get my way. I get grumpy sometimes when someone lets me down. I get grumpy sometimes when I want to wear a favorite shirt and I realize I just put it in the dirty clothes. I get grumpy when I'm trying to finish a sermon sometimes and I keep getting distracted and pulled away from my job. I get grumpy sometimes when I want to watch the Texas Rangers play a baseball game and I discover I've got a church meeting instead. Lots and lots of different things make us grumpy. They really do. Lots and lots of different things irritate us sometimes. We don't get a good night's sleep. We get grumpy. We get a toothache. We get real grumpy. Lots and lots of things make us grumpy. But here's the thing about grumpy. It's reversible. It's not an incurable disease. It's something we can deal with if we want to. Just remembering and reminding myself that I can get grumpy from time to time Reminds me that I can also do something about that. I don't have to stay grumpy. I can clean up the stink, or I can just let it linger in the air. It's my choice. I have some good friends, Danny and Lana Young. They have this really neat home down in Ingleside. And I think I've mentioned this story before, but it applies again and again. I spent some time helping them work on that house when they were first building it. They have this big metal roof on top of it, and Danny was putting some of the metal roof down one day, and I was up there helping him. That's back in the day when I could still play on ladders, and before I began falling off of them and things like that. But anyhow, I was up there helping Danny, and my job was simple. He was screwing that metal roof down with his power drill, and I had a hole punch and a hammer, and all I had to do was pop that just a starter hole in the metal for him, so he could get that bolt going down. And I discovered that if I just tapped that hole punch, all it would do is bounce off, you know, and nothing there. I put a little more. So I had to give it a pretty good whack to get a hole started. And I was pretty good at hitting the hole punch most of the time. Yeah, about 99% of the time I was hitting the hole punch, but about that 1% of the time I'd get the thumb. And 2 or 3 times in a row, I got my thumb. And I can still remember Lana asking me at one point, I said, "Ron, why do you keep hitting your thumb?" I said, "Because it feels so good when I stop." If you find yourself drifting into a grumpy mood, why stay that way? I can promise you, it does feel good when you stop. In the 4th chapter of his letter to the church at Philippi, Paul is writing and giving his congregation some advice. It's really amazing sometimes how I remember certain passages of Scripture. I remember this one because I remember the day Amanda read it for us in worship several months ago, and how wonderfully well she pronounced the names of those 2 women, Euodia and Syntyche. How close did I get? She gave me a thumbs up. He's writing this letter and he calls these 2 women out by name. He says, "I want you to iron out your differences. I want you to make up." They must have been pretty grumpy, pretty cantankerous. Something was going on in the life of that church that Paul calls out these 2 women by name. Now I want you to imagine just for a second, Ron is standing here this morning in front of you, and I pick out 2 of you and call you out by name. I call you to task for what you're saying or what you're doing in front of the whole group. I mean, Paul is a lot more courageous than I am, because I'm not about to do that. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, but things must have been pretty bad for Paul to do that. Irritable, cantankerous behavior can turn a workplace. It can turn a school. It can turn a baseball team. It can turn a church into a tense, anxious place that isn't good for anyone. What did Paul tell those 2 members of that congregation? He said, "Quit it. Stop it." And he continues to say, God does not want his children holding grudges. Did we talk about grudges a couple of weeks ago? How a grudge can just suck the joy and the energy right out of your life. Holding a grudge can make you bitter. And holding grudges can turn you into a grump, which is nothing more than making grumpy a way of living. And that's no way to live. Are we called to be bad-tempered or kind? As Christians, are we called to be cantankerous or compassionate? Irritable or gracious? Surly or patient with one another? I grew up along the coast. I was down there just yesterday to officiate a funeral service for a retired Methodist pastor and old friend. I grew up along that coast, and I spent a lot of days offshore on my dad's shrimp boats. And I saw a lot of storms. Still see some at times. Now, some of those storms that have a little energy. Those summer squalls that just sort of pop up out of nowhere. They dump a little bit of rain here or there, and there'll be a little bit of wind and maybe knock down a limb or two, but they don't have a lot of energy. They don't have a lot of staying power. Some of those little summer showers, squalls, they burn themselves out quickly. But there are other storms. Storms that spend days and weeks offshore, churning and gathering energy. Storms that lay offshore and move slowly and spend days and weeks drawing more energy and heat into the mix. They churn and they get bigger. They churn and they get stronger until finally they hit land as a Category 3 or a Category 4 hurricane. And when they hit land, the devastation is horrific. Lives are destroyed. Lives are changed forever. We can learn a lesson from those storms. We all get grumpy. We all get irritable or cantankerous. We all say and do things that make life unpleasant for others. And so when we catch ourselves starting to churn and build up a good head of steam, perhaps it would be wise to stop that process. Find a way of tapping it down before it gets out of control and explodes and breaks hearts and damages relationships so badly that it will be difficult to mend them. Don't ever let your grump grow to arrogant strength. I don't know what all happened in Dallas the other night. 5 police officers were killed, many others wounded. And beyond that, the terror and the fear that so many live with. I don't know what all was churning in that young man, but I know this. It grew and it grew and it grew till it got out of control to a point it exploded in a very horrific way. Violence exploded in a way that it never should have. That happens to all of us sometime or another. I don't think most of us would ever think about doing what he did. But we do let our anger, we do let the things that irritate us, we do let the things that disturb us and bother us, we let them grow and churn in us sometimes until they do explode in ways that are not helpful, in which they damage other people emotionally. It's something we should always be on guard, always be watching, always be thoughtful about. Darlene and I gave our sweet little dog, Bridget, a bath in Cuero that night. How many different kinds of shampoo did we use, honey? Everything we could think of. Anything worked particularly well for any of you? I've always heard the tomato juice. It didn't work for me. We gave Bridget a lot of baths. And we did the best we could to get the smell of the skunk out of her hair and to get it out of our home. It took a while. It took a little bit of time, but we finally succeeded. And we all learned a good lesson in the process. I don't know if you have any stink that needs to be cleaned up, but I would invite you this morning to think about the lingering smell of skunk and how it can make life irritable. And I'd like for you to reflect on storms and how they can burn themselves out quickly and allow the sun to come back out, or how sometimes they can rage and churn before they finally explode. Grumpy might make a cute member of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but Grumpy makes a lousy member of the family. Amen? Amen. Amen. Let us continue our worship service.